I kept telling myself that this year would be different. As the gray winter highway curved into familiar streets lined with plastic reindeer and glitter-frosted wreaths, I clung to a hope so delicate it threatened to crack under the slightest pressure. Maybe my family would finally see me. Not the awkward shadow who lingered on the edges of photos, not the child they forgot to pick up from school one December because the real kids had a choir concert, but the person I had become. My newly won independence shimmered inside me like a secret star, and I imagined walking through the front door with a confident smile, hearing genuine warmth in their voices. I rehearsed greetings in my head, practicing charm like someone learning to speak again. The car heater hummed a soft lullaby of reassurance. It was Christmas, after all, the season of forgiveness, reconciliation, miracles. I told myself it was fine that they barely texted me. I told myself it was fine that I had spent last Christmas alone eating microwave pasta. I told myself that if I walked in with love, love would finally come back. I smoothed my coat, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into the snow with a heart foolish enough to still believe. The house looked just as I remembered, big and boastful, wrapped in twinkling lights brighter than anything that ever shone inside it. I paused on the porch, the glow of the wreath reflecting in the window like a watching eye. I rang the bell once politely, but the door flung open as if I were already an inconvenience. "Oh," my mother said, lips curling into a familiar expression of restrained disappointment. "You came." Before I could reply, she turned and walked back inside, leaving the door ajar in an invitation colder than the wind. I stepped over the threshold, inhaling the scent of cinnamon and pine mixed with something sour resentment, maybe. My sister glanced up from her phone long enough to smirk. My brothers continued their loud performance of sibling perfection, too busy bragging about their lives to acknowledge mine. The room was filled with laughter, but none of it had a place for me. Still, I clung to the possibility that they were simply distracted, that the warmth I craved was only a moment away. That hope flickered, fragile as a candle in a draft. I set the gift bags I'd brought, thoughtful ones, carefully chosen, by the tree, but my sister scooped them up between two contemptuous fingers as if they were thrift store junk. "No name tags?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Typical. I opened my mouth to say that the tags had fallen off in the car, but the truth didn't matter here. My father gave me a stiff nod from the couch, then immediately turned back to my brothers, asking about job promotions, engagement plans, anything that affirmed his lineage of success. I waited for my turn, a simple "How have you been?" But the silence around me grew thick and deliberate. The Christmas lights flickered like they were laughing along. I tried to smile, tried to insert myself gently into the conversation, but every word I offered slid to the floor unnoticed, trampled by the noisy parade of their self-importance. My heart knocked against my ribs, pleading for someone, anyone, to care that I existed. Dinner was a performance, and I had been cast as the prop in the corner. The table overwhelmed with food: glazed ham, garlic mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce shaped like the tin it came from, but no one looked in my direction when invitations were implied. When I finally took a plate for myself, my mother sighed dramatically. "We didn't plan for extras," she announced, as though I were a stranger who had wandered in off the street. The others chuckled, not the joyful kind but the cruel chorus that strips dignity from bones. Heat flushed up my neck, but I shrugged it off and served myself anyway, fingers trembling as I navigated the buffet of judgment. I found a seat at the far corner, invisible yet painfully obvious. Their laughter filled the room like smoke, and I was choking on memories of every Christmas I had spent wishing I mattered. They asked the questions they always asked, not to know me, but to wound. Still living in that tiny apartment? Still single? Still pretending you'll make something out of yourself? My accomplishments, once hard-earned triumphs, shattered on the table like cheap ornaments. I tried to explain the freelance consulting work I was doing, how exciting it felt to be in charge of my own future, but my father dismissed it with a scoff. "So, unemployed." The word landed with a thud. My sister flipped her hair and announced her latest luxury purchase, earning applause. My brothers competed over whose life was more enviable, and I sat trying not to shrink into dust. Even the clink of silverware sounded judgmental. I stared at my barely touched plate, the food turning to stone in my mouth, and wondered why I had ever dared to hope. Then came the stories about me, exaggerated, twisted relics of my childhood, failures trotted out for comedy. They laughed about the time they lost me at the amusement park. They laughed about how I used to cry when they forgot my birthday. They laughed about how sensitive I was, how weak, how clingy. My mother added her own greatest hits. How I never fit in, how I was always dramatic, how I should be grateful they kept a roof over my head at all. The laughter swelled, a wave designed to drown me. I felt myself shrinking back into that forgotten child, terrified, desperate for approval that would never come. My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. I tried to keep breathing evenly, tried not to let them see how deep the blade was, cutting, but the humiliation sliced through every attempt at composure. When the gifts were passed out, my name remained conspicuously absent. Everyone tore into shiny packages while I sat with empty hands in my lap, smiling too hard, pretending I didn't care. My sister smirked at me over a designer scarf. Maybe, next year, if you actually do something with your life. My father didn't even look at me as he toasted to real success, the kind that makes a family proud. The words struck like a hammer. My chest felt hollow, a house gutted by fire, only the charred beams of hope remaining. I stared at the tree glittering with ornaments representing family memories I had never been part of. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not for them. I clenched my shaking hands beneath the table, nails digging crescents into my palms, and wondered how much more I could endure before breaking. The final blow came when my brothers decided the night needed a joke and I was the punchline. One of them stood behind me, mimicking my posture with exaggerated awkwardness, while the other narrated a cruel parody of my supposed life, the lonely failure who shows up begging for attention. Laughter exploded, encouraged by my mother's proud cackle, the queen delighted by her court's entertainment. I felt my cheeks burn, humiliation pulsing like a heartbeat. They wanted a reaction. They always had. They expected me to snap or cry or run. For a moment, I almost did. I almost let their cruelty define me again. But something inside me, something long dormant and fiercely alive, whispered that this was the last time they would ever have the power to hurt me. In that moment, clarity sliced through the chaos. I was done begging for scraps of love, done shrinking to fit their twisted narrative, done pretending this family was anything other than a gilded cage lined with barbed wire. My breathing slowed, and with each inhale I felt the weight of their words lose its grip. I smiled, small at first, then wider as the truth surged up, like a tide. They didn't know what I knew. They had no idea who I had become. They had no clue about the papers I'd signed months ago, the silent authority I now held over something they cherished far more than me. And oh, how poetic it suddenly felt that this revelation would unfold here, beneath this plastic joy and hollow cheer. So I stood and straightened my coat, my voice steady for the first time that night. I actually have something important to share, I said. The laughter died instantly, confusion rippling through the room. My father raised an eyebrow, already annoyed that I dared speak. I held their attention like a magician preparing a final trick, and my heartbeat thrummed with a new kind of strength, as if on cue because it was the doorbell rang. My mother frowned, irritated that someone might disrupt her perfectly curated holiday. I simply stepped aside and watched her open the door, and there stood my lawyer, crisp suit, leather, briefcase, and a subtle smile that promised everything was about to change. My mother blinked at the man on the porch, her mouth tightening in suspicion. "We're not interested in buying anything," she snapped, already trying to close the door. But my lawyer, Mr. Harrington, calm as winter moonlight, blocked it effortlessly with a polished shoe. "I'm not a salesman," he said, voice smooth as silk. "I have urgent business with your family." The words slithered into the room, freezing everyone mid-laugh. I watched their smug expressions twist into confusion, irritation, then something else, the first delicious hint of fear. My father stood, puffing himself up like he always did when challenged. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Mr. Harrington stepped inside, snowflakes still sparkling on his coat as he opened the briefcase with a satisfying click. He turned to me, offering a respectful nod. "Shall I?" he asked. My heart shimmered with a thrill. I had never known the taste of long-awaited justice. "I represent your child," Mr. Harrington began, gesturing toward me with a professionalism that wrapped around me like armor. My mother scoffed. "Whatever complaint they've cooked up," she started. But Mr. Harrington cut her off with a raised hand. "Not a complaint, a confirmation." He laid a stack of documents on the coffee table, the papers crisp and overwhelmingly official. Seals, signatures, entire worlds of power they couldn't yet comprehend. "As of 3 months ago," he continued, "the full ownership of the family property and associated investments transferred to them." Silence cracked like ice under a skate. My father's jaw fell open. My sister let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a choke. My brothers looked at each other as if someone had just turned gravity off. I stood absolutely still, watching the reality of my words sink into their bones like frostbite. "That's impossible," my father barked. But his voice wavered. "I control our estate. I always have." The desperation in his tone was a revelation. Here was a man whose identity depended entirely on ownership, not love. Mr. Harrington tapped the top document with one perfectly manicured finger. "The late grandfather Sullivan disagreed," he said. My mother staggered back as if slapped. "Your father hated them," she spat, pointing at me like I were something rotten. "He barely acknowledged they existed." I felt a twinge in my chest. True, grandfather had never been warm to me, but he had seen them more clearly than they realized. He had seen the cracks in their perfect facade, the casual cruelty, the neglect disguised as superiority. And he had chosen to break the cycle in the only way this family would understand, through power. My siblings swarmed the documents like vultures picking over a carcass. "There has to be a mistake," my sister hissed, flipping through pages. She clearly didn't understand. My eldest brother shook his head in disbelief. Why would he leave anything to them? The emphasis them was a dagger they no longer had the right to wield. I took a step forward, my voice quiet but sharp. "Maybe because he noticed who you all became." The words landed like shrapnel. My father glared at me with a hatred so deep it was almost comical. He opened his mouth to argue again, but Mr. Harrington slid another form forward, this one stamped with the unstoppable authority of the law. "Any challenge will fail," he said. "Grandfather's intentions are unmistakable. This is final." The room erupted. My mother clutched her pearls. Yes, she actually wore pearls, as if her entire life were slipping through her fingers. My brothers shouted about fairness. My sister demanded to know what I did to manipulate the situation. I didn't flinch. Their panic washed over me like a cleansing fire, burning away years of shame. For once, I wasn't the silent victim. I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the sender, undeniable and untouchable. I watched them scramble, the once mighty family crumbling into terrified children before my eyes. And the power of the moment wasn't intoxicating because it hurt them, though it did, but because it healed me. Every laugh at my expense, every dismissal, every omission, was being balanced by the universe at last. "It appears," Mr. Harrington said, clearing his throat for emphasis, "that continued residence in this home is contingent on mutual agreement with the new owner." He looked directly at me. I lifted my chin, letting the gravity of my authority settle like a crown. My mother sputtered. "You wouldn't, you couldn't," she stammered. "This house has been in our family for generations." Mr. Harrington nodded politely. "Exactly. And now it remains in the family. Through them." Her knees buckled, and she dropped onto the couch like a marionette with its strings cut. My father's face flushed so red I feared he might explode. "You ungrateful little," he started, but I raised a hand. He stopped. For the first time, when I spoke, my voice commanded the room. Careful, I said softly. That tone isn't going to help your case. The Christmas decorations around us, Santa figurines, mistletoe, the fake fireplace loop playing on the TV suddenly seemed ridiculous. They had spent years constructing the illusion of a perfect family, but now the truth was shining too bright for the tinsel to hide. You only came here to ruin Christmas, my sister accused, like she hadn't spent the evening tearing me apart piece by piece. I looked at her, really looked, the desperation behind her sneer, the fear of losing the life she'd always taken for granted. I came here hoping for a family, I said. You all chose the rest. The silence that followed was thick and sharp, a blade pressed against the throat of every lie they had ever told themselves. My father lunged for the documents, but Mr. Harrington slid them smoothly out of reach. Attempting to destroy legal evidence, he said calmly, would only make things worse. My father froze, caught between rage and helplessness. The same man who had ignored me for years now looked like he might beg. My mother's eyes shimmered with angry tears. We took care of you, she whispered, voice trembling. I met her gaze, remembering the nights I cried alone while they laughed. Behind closed doors. You tolerated my existence, I corrected. There's a difference. She opened her mouth, perhaps to deny it, but the words died in her throat. Truth can be heavy. Tonight, it was crushing them. This can still go smoothly, Mr. Harrington said, folding his hands. Provided respect is shown moving forward. The irony tasted sweet. Respect, the one currency they had never considered me worthy of, was now the only thing that could save them from losing everything. My siblings stared at me, stunned into silence. I saw fear flicker in their eyes, real fear, the kind that comes from realizing the person you underestimated has the power to end you. My father swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling. He managed only a whisper. What do you want? The question hung in the air, a desperate admission that everything had changed. I let the moment breathe. I wanted them to feel the shift, to understand that the balance had been redefined. What do I want? I repeated, tasting the question like a fine wine. I took a slow step toward the tree, its lights twinkling as if celebrating my rebirth. And then, turning back to them, the family who never saw me until now, I answered, I want what I've always deserved: respect, acknowledgement, and for you to understand that I'm not the worthless outsider you painted me to be. Their eyes widened, and I knew they finally saw me not as the punchline, not as the afterthought, but as the one holding the pen that would write the next chapter of their lives. My father took a step toward me, his voice suddenly drenched in honeyed persuasion. We can work something out, he murmured, as if kindness had ever been his native language. My siblings nodded, each scrambling to repaint themselves as compassionate allies. The transformation would have been hilarious if it weren't so predictable. They needed me now, and desperation made them clumsy. We'll treat you better, my sister said, but the plea rang hollow, a patch hastily slapped over a lifetime of fractures. I let them speak their hurried apologies, their rewrites of history, their delusions of closeness. It was fascinating watching them try to claw back control they had already lost. Their words were empty ornaments, shiny, breakable, and easily swept away. I listened in silence, letting the tension stretch like a ribbon pulled taut across the room, their hope fraying at the edges. Then, with one calm breath, I cut the ribbon. I'm not here to negotiate, I said. Their faces fell in unison, a synchronized collapse of entitlement. My lawyer remained motionless, the guardian of this reckoning. I spent years begging for this family to love me, I continued. I twisted myself into knots trying to earn a seat at a table you never intended to make room for. A tremor escaped my mother's lips, not remorse, but realization. So now, I said, standing taller, I'm taking back every piece of myself I gave up trying to belong to you. My voice didn't quiver. It soared. This house, it's mine now, and you will treat me with basic human decency or you will pack your things and go. Today, the last word echoed off the walls like a gavel strike sealing their fate. My father's nostrils flared as if he'd been struck. My sister let out a tiny whimper, her eyes darting toward the staircase leading to her perfectly arranged bedroom. My brothers exchanged frantic looks, practically calculating how quickly they could salvage their belongings. They had always been the masters of this kingdom, the self-appointed royalty, and now the throne had shifted beneath their feet. You wouldn't, my mother whispered again, voice trembling between threat and plea. I raised an eyebrow. Try me. Something inside me, confidence, maybe even joy, blazed like a hearth long unlit. They had forged this fire. I was simply learning how to wield its heat. My father opened his mouth again, but no sound emerged, silence finally claiming the man who had always spoken over me. Mr. Harrington snapped his briefcase shut with a definitive click, his part in this drama nearly complete. The new terms are effective immediately, he said, sliding one final envelope into my palm. If you require any further assistance, you know how to reach me. I nodded, gratitude blooming in my chest, not just for his legal prowess, but for standing beside me in a room where I had always stood alone. He excused himself, tipping his head in polite farewell as he exited into the cold blue evening. The door closed behind him with the softest thud, but to me it sounded like a steel vault locking out the past. For a beat, no one spoke. The air was charged, brittle, waiting for the final fracture. I let my gaze travel slowly, deliberately across their faces. You all did everything you could to break me, I said. Tonight you failed. My brothers shrank back, their shoulders folding inward. My sister wiped a tear she didn't deserve to shed. My mother's face collapsed, years of smug superiority melting into panicked regret. Even then, she reached for the only weapon she understood. We're family, she pleaded. That has to count for something. A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp as a snapped icicle. Family counts, I said, but only when love exists. Only when respect exists. You never offered either. The truth hit them like a winter storm, ruthless and undeniable. I turned toward the doorway, grabbing my coat from the hook where I had once hung hope. For the first time, my movements felt powerful, fluid, certain. My father made one last attempt to salvage control. Where are you going? He demanded, but there was no authority left in his voice, just fear. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Somewhere I'm wanted, I said. Somewhere my presence isn't treated like an inconvenience or a joke. The silence behind me was deafening, a void that finally swallowed the echoes of all their cruelty. I stepped out onto the porch, the winter air crisp and exhilarating, as freedom itself filled my lungs. Snowflakes danced in the lamplight like confetti celebrating my escape. The night sky stretched wide above me, vast and welcoming in ways that house had never been. My heart hammered not from fear anymore, but exhilaration. Every footstep away from that door felt like shedding another layer of pain they'd wrapped around me. I glanced back only once, not for nostalgia but to marvel at the sight. The grand house that had loomed over my childhood now looked small, shrinking under the weight of its occupants' panic. I realized then that their power had always been an illusion, a puppet show that only worked when I believed the strings were unbreakable. But I had finally cut them. The cold bit my cheeks, but joy burned brighter. At the end of the driveway, I stopped to take in the moment, the final scene of a story I never thought I'd rewrite. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Mr. Harrington. Proud of you. Call tomorrow to review next steps. I smiled, real and full. Tomorrow would be about decisions, renovations, maybe tenants, maybe selling the property entirely, but tonight was about release. Tonight was about celebrating the person I had become despite them. Christmas lights twinkled across the neighborhood, reflections of joy that finally felt real instead of forced. My breath steamed the air like a dragon exhaling victory. For the first time, Christmas belonged to me. In the quiet glow of the street lamps, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I walk willingly into the arms of those who only wished to cut me down. Never again would I tie my worth to people incapable of seeing it. Love, I realized, wasn't something to beg for, it was something to protect, especially from those who tried to destroy it. I wrapped my arms around myself, not in loneliness, but in comfort. I had given so much of my life letting their cruelty define me. Now, every step forward would be built on the foundation of self-respect I had reclaimed tonight. I wasn't leaving home, I was finding it. I walked away not quietly, not meekly, but with a strength forged from every wound they ever inflicted. Behind me, the house flickered with fading laughter and rising panic. Ahead, the world opened, like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. I didn't need their approval anymore. I never had. My worth was not up for debate, not by people who only remembered I existed when they needed someone to belittle. The cold wind whipped through my hair as I whispered my final verdict into the night. Some families are built from love. Others are dismantled by it. I chose self-worth. I chose peace. I chose to be my own miracle this Christmas. And that finally was enough.